Welcome to AfterSOF, where veterans are connecting with the culture that influenced our lives and engaging with people along our journey to create community. I'm Patrick Brennan, former Green Beret, joined by my co-host Daniel Bell, former SOF veteran, and today our guest is Joe King, SOF veteran extraordinaire and weapons expert. So welcome, did I say Josh?
No, you said Joe. You started to say Joe.
Joe.
Welcome,
All
Joe.
right. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, it's good to see you, brother.
Man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, so I hear you're in Alabama. Is that right? You're down deep south.
Very, very southern. I relocated to Birmingham 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It's really been a blessing and been a great move for me and my family, but it is the South.
Yeah, but you're from Ohio, like me. We're both northeastern Ohio guys. So, Alabama football has been making a little bit of news lately. Nick Saban's ruffling some feathers out there in the headlines. What's the reaction there in Birmingham?
Yesterday, a lot of people were talking, and it's just funny because if you want to talk about support that someone has, it's Nick Saban.
Right.
I mean, it's wild. They always say Nick Saban doesn't say anything that isn't calculated, that he wants a response, he wants a reaction. So yeah, it's everybody loves him.
Yeah.
They always say it's better to be loved than hated, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, growing up though, Big Ten football, SEC's had a lot of success lately, but Big Ten football is different, right? Alabama, there's no snow in Alabama. How do you play football without snow? I don't.
We discussed this yesterday. It's whether it's football, the fall, fires, sweaters, hot apple cider. Like if you're from that Midwest area, Big Ten football was huge to you. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, these big rivalries. It's definitely a different scenario down south. It's more Bud Lights, flip-flops, and shorts,
Right.
It actually makes you a little bit jealous because we, being from, northeastern Ohio, I'm born and raised in the Akron area, and we had to, sacrifice. We had to go sit on cold bleachers, right? We had to use hand warmers. These guys, they don't even know what it is.
Yeah. It's fair weather football, right?
Yeah. Fair weather football. That's a fair statement. Yes, of course.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. I don't think I remember going to a Nebraska game that I was not freezing my tail off. It was just cold. Football season was cold.
Yeah.
And then that jealousy that you're talking about, because you're like, oh, of course you can perform better. Yeah, you want to brag on how SEC, ACC is the best, but you've got that warm weather. Like, get up there and perform in that cold, sub-zero temperature.
Yeah.
What affects? That's why everyone's building a dome.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. Reduce all of the weather variables, right? Yeah. But there's some other things going on in Alabama here this week. But I think someone you and Daniel served with or know from your former units is running for office.
Let's talk about our fellow Night Stalker and what you and Nathan were doing.
Yeah, didn't serve with him. When that went down, I was 13 years old. Remember it on the news, but once I ended up at 160th, as a Night Stalker, he had come several times to Wanza, which is Week of the Night Stalker, where they have families come in, correspondence, news, and you can see what's kind of happening at the unit at a small level. They don't let you behind the curtain or anything. But Mike DuRant's running for Senate here. So we really wanted to put in our support. We're Night Stalkers. We know at least some of his background, right? And we have quite a few things in common with him just because of that. And everything in politics is a smear campaign. I'm better, this person's not as good, whatever it is. But Nathan Hunt and I, another friend that was at 160th with us, we just decided to go and try and help his campaign. And, it would be nice to have a guy with that background who came back from a insane, experience being a POW, helicopter crash. Like, I mean, everyone knows the story, but then to come back and reintegrate to society and start his own company and be successful and have a job and raise a family, we just felt like that was something we should support. So we've really tried to get behind him and help him out. And not that the other candidates are horrible people or anything bad about them. It's just we have more in common with him. We feel like we would know him better, So it's been a really awesome experience, actually.
I mean, and I like what you said, man. The reintegration, right? I mean, and we'll probably talk about this a lot today, but and I'm sure part of the campaign was, promoting a lot of his military accolades or, what he experienced in the military, right? There's a lot of, it seems there's a big surge of, whether it's Navy SEALs or Green Berets or other military veterans running for office. And we tend to highlight a lot of the military accolades, but it's really that component of taking that experiences learned from the military and then reintegrating back into society, right? Being able to be an entrepreneur, start a business, and be a leader in that sense, which is probably something that makes him a really great candidate, right? I mean, it's not just the military; it's how he translated that experience back into society.
Yeah, what he's given back to his community, how he's helped other veterans. Everybody that I know who works for Pinnacle was, if they weren't in the 160th, they were in another area of Army aviation. So he's given a huge opportunity to guys from the Army aviation community.
Yeah.
And he's transferred the company back to its employee owned, and so he's taking those values that really he expressed through the way he conducted himself as a POW, and through that entire Mogadishu scenario, he's taken those values and applied them to the community where he retired.
Yeah.
And that's impressive. When we worked with General Boykin a little bit to see if we could get an endorsement, and General Boykin, that's one of the things that he talked about is Mike's character in throughout the entire Mogadishu, his time in captivity, and how he conducted himself. And you can always look back and say, hey, that person was able to persevere through this. Of course he's battle tested, literally battle tested. His life was on the line, and he still maintained those conducting himself in a way that expressed those values that he believed in.
Yeah.
What is crazy to me is if you're in a college fraternity, if you're in an organization and a club, it's kind of accepted. But that's the military, right? So we just fall into what we know because of something we chose, whether it's Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Arizona State, USC. It's always that. It's where did you go to? Who are you affiliated with? Who are you linked in with? Who are you connected with? And I mean LinkedIn before LinkedIn, right?
Yeah. Right.
Just because it's funny. But that was the thing. Like, of course, like he's going to come back and he knows how this program works. He knows the people that he's around and surrounded by. So he's going to surround himself with people that he trusts and, he feels he can rely on, which is a smart move, right? You usually don't go outside to bring people in unless they're highly recommended or vetted.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you're correct. Like, I mean, think about it. Like, we can't trust anyone on Wall Street, banks, like mortgage.
You're right.
No. Yeah. We trust Patrick.
Yeah. I hope so.
What I'm saying is like we all these incidences in the U.S. where it was, you know, the stock market crashes, mortgage issues, you know, companies bailing out banks, whatever it is. This guy conducted himself well, right? That's exactly it. Like, we don't know those people's character. So the military community feels like they do know Mike DuRant's character because of what he was put through, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And trust me, everybody has a, you know, an angle, right?
Yeah.
The guys in Mogadishu had an angle for keeping him alive because they wanted something from him, right?
Yeah.
And through his training, he was able to make his own agenda work.
Yeah.
You know, he had to, you know, it's self-preservation. You know, it's not like he wanted to die. Nobody wants to die, you know? So that was the thing. It was like, he did what he had to do, and he did it in a very professional way. He did it as a soldier, you know, and thinking about the military and his family and the country itself, to not embarrass them. And everything worked out, and he came back, you know, and he is very successful, but it's not because it was handed to him. He worked very hard for it. We spent quite a bit of time together talking with him, you know, feeling him out. And it's easy to get online and say, this person doesn't like this and this person doesn't like that, and, you know, be very aggressive. But where the rubber meets the road, he's put in a lot of hard work to get where he's at today, and he cares about the country. So we felt like, as prior Night Stalkers and prior servicemen, it is part of our responsibility to help support him and vet him. I mean, we asked him a lot of questions too, but the questions that we asked, we don't need to splash that on every single, you know, newspaper or outlet, because as long as I knew, that was enough for me and Nathan to, you know, start down that road to try and help him.
Yeah.
And we'll see if it works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but you think about that, right? Like, nobody can really fully appreciate or understand the experience that he went through as a POW, right? Unless you did it, right? I mean, that's how the world works, right? Like, you can't, you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes without actually having done it. And so that experience alone is something, you know, worthy of respect, obviously.
Yeah.
But the other part of that is coming back and being an entrepreneur and being a leader and being somebody that other people could rely on or use as a mentor, or, you know, the folks that he's hired as part of his organization. And like, that's influencing your community in a huge way, right? Over time. I mean, I'm multiple decades now, right? So that's a huge thing, and something that we definitely want to talk about more of. But, you know, you yourself, Joe, I mean, you had a pretty cool career yourself, right? So, like, when we say, you know, Joe King, like, who's Joe King? Like, where'd you come? You came from Ohio, joined the military. Like, talk to us about that a bit.
Everyone always says weapons expert, and I kind of laugh. I'm very into it. I would consider, like, Larry Vickers and Kyle Lamb and, you know, some of these guys as experts. I would consider myself learning. I was super fortunate, and I say that for real. It was an odd thing. You know, born and raised in Akron, Ohio, in the area. We moved around a lot as a child, but I ended up joining the service, and April 2001.
Yeah.
Just a dumb kid, you know. I don't know anything. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go. And I was honestly, like, I was scared of heights, and I didn't like blood. Right? But my stepmom was a nurse, and I always thought it was really cool, some of the stories she would tell. And I literally went into the recruiter, took my ASVAB, took my tests, and they were like, hey, you're smart enough to do something here, you know? So what would you like to do? And I literally said, I think I want to jump out of planes, and I want to be in the infantry, but I think I want to be a medic too. And the guy was like, not a problem. Then I think they were called RGB4s, which was...
That's a Ranger contract, right?
AIT,
Yeah.
Airborne School to RIP, or Ranger Regiment, if you completed it. But I joined, left, and it was kind of crazy. End up at MEPS, go to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was hot and nasty. Left there, ended up getting to Fort Sam Houston, Bravo Company 232. And, in the military, like when you start an Alpha Company, you kind of follow it through, right? So I was in Alpha Company during basic, but then our bus broke down because it was a government bus. So we were a day and a half late. So we had to be moved to Bravo Company, which is funny because I never thought about it until years later. Is during AIT, we had just taken the National Registry to become EMTs, and September 11th happens. Yeah. We're in the chow hall. Drill sergeants come in, get up now, like really intense. We go to Dan probably knows because he probably hangs out there a lot because he's in the Fort Sam Houston, but it's the big auditorium there. They took us to that big auditorium that's down there. I don't know exactly the name of it, but they had TVs running. I'm talking like the TVs, not big flat screens and fancy, like box TVs on carts.
Yeah.
Right? And one building, one tower's on fire, and the second one with the plane had hit it. We saw that, right? You didn't really see footage of the first plane, I think, until the day after or whatever. We were in shock.
Yeah.
Nobody, I mean, honestly, when we were sitting there as soldiers, we're young kids, like we didn't know anything. Was it made up? Was it fake? Are they trying to fake us out? Who knows?
It's crazy. I mean, that's crazy to think, right? Like enlisting in the military prior to 9/11, right? I mean, we all probably think about everybody remembers where they were when that happened, right? Like we all have different experiences, and we could all remember that moment and how that moment influenced our lives and decisions down the road. But like to be in, like now I'm in the Army, you're in the Army, and this, like, you weren't thinking about war when you signed up for the Army, right? Like, and to be sitting there in the chow hall when that happens, like, man, that's an incredible.
Yeah, when you didn't even really know the Army yet.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. Like, when you decide to join the military, you know that war is always an option, right? Yeah. It's always something that could happen. But at the time, it was really, I want to do something for my country and I want to better myself, right? That's really was my thing. And I had, grandfathers that were in World War II and stuff, of course, uncle that was a Marine in Vietnam. So I had these people I looked up to, and it was always something I wanted to do. So you do it. And then it was shocking, and we ended up, that was the crazy part is because myself and another guy had already passed the National Registry. They basically came in and said, hey, you and one other dude, there were only 3 of us that had airborne contracts. You guys are not graduating. You need to go pack your stuff. And within, I believe it was 8 or 9 days, we did like a road march to make sure we could road march. They always get you on a PT test, right? Do a PT test. And then we packed our crap and went. And we were on our way to airborne school now. Like everything got accelerated. And I laugh. I'll tell you this one funny story is when we landed on the plane, I took from the Columbus airport, I took a $75 cab ride to airborne school. Okay. Now that sounds crazy right now because you're both laughing because we all know it doesn't cost $75. Yeah. I've been back to Fort Benning multiple times and it never cost me more than $25. But I'm like, that guy got me, right? He must have been a retired sergeant major or something driving a cab because he got
definitely sergeant major.
$25 as an E2, I'll find him one day. But, we show up to airborne school, we sign in, and the military is yelling, screaming. They get crazy with you, right? The shark attack, the, knife cutting edge, command hand. None of that was really going on. Everyone was in shock. We were at war. Everyone knew it. I told you yesterday, the lead, black hat there was like, hey, we're at war. If you swim in the Chattahoochee River, he was going to kill us. Right. If we were out drinking, getting arrested, he was going to kill us. Like, I mean, everything was like so serious. It went from, okay, we're in the Army to, oh my gosh. Everything was accelerated, right? Like we go and you're immersed in it now. And there was no turning back. Like you had to make the mental decision that from here on out, you're completing everything, you're doing it, right? It is going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what, I ended up doing. You had to go for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that seems really heavy, right? Like, I joined and we were already in two wars.
Yeah.
Like it was a different, I knew from the get go, like this is okay. Well, this is the ultimate destination is either Iraq or Afghanistan. Like at some point in the next 2 years, I'm going to be there. Right. Like,
yeah, it was definitely different being in the military, but yeah, I went through tech school through basic training and here at Fort Sam in '97. So I was sitting at West Point when that happened, 52 miles north of Manhattan, and you're like, this is our backyard.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what Joe was going through because you weren't even through your initial entry training. Like you were almost finished with that, and then all that happened. So I spent the year 2000 when everybody was like, oh, Y2K, and I spent that in South Korea, right? And everybody was worried that, oh, maybe North Korea is going to do something or the world's going to end or whatever. And I made it through that. And so then you're hanging out, life is good in the U.S., and all of a sudden that happens. But I have some experience from the military to draw on. You literally got thrown in. You had this whole baptism of fire,
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so what happened next, right? Like you guys, all right, you're like, you're a paramedic now, or you're an EMT. Cool. Go, right? Go to the next one. So
It was without a hitch. I mean, they were like, everything was so serious. Like I said, it wasn't like the typical, what you see on the movies, yelling and screaming. Like everybody knew like this had become so serious that you just had to complete it. I always laugh when we graduated, I was going on to RIP, and I believe, I have no idea where he's at to this day, but there was a guy, it was Sergeant First Class Randy Duncan. He was wearing a tan beret. This was right when it had changed over and stuff, or right around the time. And I remember somebody was like, Private King. And I'm like, what do you want? Like just, a numbskull. And I look out of the door, and this guy, I mean, he's got two clefts in his chin, he double cleft up, like not just one cleft, he's got two clefts in his chin. And I mean, he's hard as woodpecker lips, and he's standing there. And I was like, I probably shouldn't have just yelled down the hall, because this is one of the, RIP instructors.
Right.
And he just points and he's like, you come with me. Cause I was one of the guys that had that contract. And I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know what's happening next. Right. We were graduating.
Yeah.
Long story short, they put us in trucks, drive us, I think, all the way around Fort Benning until, you're back and your butt's raw, and, you're in a LMTV and it's blacked out, and then they get you out, and we kind of yelling and screaming, get us off through these sandbags. And we ended up popping up on the regimental headquarters where they have like all the training area where they had all the names in black and red on the walls of all the Rangers that had died, and it was like, you're going to be starting RIP. So right around that time is when the 3rd Ranger Battalion had left to go to Afghanistan. So I got put on a detail to go because like they were still utilizing us, right? We're still just soldiers. So we're like loading stuff up. I mean, it was this insane experience. So as I went through RIP, and then I believe it was 45 days, what was crazy is I tell Dan and other people that I was not a SOCM qualified medic. So I couldn't do anything. I literally was sweeping the floors all day, waiting for, people to return. And that same guy ended up coming and saying that there were certain units that needed medics immediately. And One was 173rd Airborne Infantry Brigade, didn't know anything about it, volunteered for it. I didn't even realize that it was in Italy at the time. I just didn't want to sweep floors anymore and mop. Right. So I end up going home for, 2 weeks, and then end up leaving and going to Italy. And 173rd was in Vicenza, really cool unit. And I believe they were taking a lot of guys, because a lot of guys would come from regiment to 173rd, just like they would come to 160th also. Like a lot of guys would end up there medic wise and stuff for to get a different perspective, but end up in Italy. And really, just amazing. It had just restood up, I believe, in 2000.
Oh, was that in 170?
Yeah, it had been reflagged out of Fort Campbell. And we had Command Sergeant Major Gunther and Colonel William Mayville. Now I believe those guys are retired, but they both went very high in the military. Great command staff. And because the war was going on, it was so serious. We ended up in Italy and we just trained. We were jumping all the time, training with different countries, Grafenwehr and Hohensfels. We went to Hungary, training in Italy. I ended up getting Italian jump wings. It was just this really cool opportunity to get all this training as a young soldier. But again, I didn't know anything about the Army yet. Like I still wasn't trained about the Army. And then once it had been initiated that we were going to go to Iraq, we were supposed to take boats. And we went to this place called Grizzliano. And we loaded up trains and took those trains down to a place called Livorno, Italy. And we were unloading all of our stuff to put them on boats to ship everything to Turkey. And then we were going to go through Turkey and drive down. Well, apparently at that time, Turkey cut us off and said we weren't going to use them as a staging ground. And I'll never forget, they came down and they had this big binder, had all these names on it. And they just started put us in formation and just started calling off names, and none of us knew what we were doing. They just started calling off names, and it was very random, like guys standing next to you. They weren't going in any order or nothing. And they said, we've picked 1,000 guys, and in a day and a half, you're going to jump into Iraq, and we're going to take you to Aviano Air Force Base. We got on buses, drove to Aviano Air Force Base, and it was nuts, man. There were 13 C-17s parked on a tarmac. 13 C-17s. Like, I'm an E3 who's only really technically been in the Army for a year. Right. Really, it was insane. A year and a half. But it was like, there's helicopters flying around. There's this big gated corral, and they were making us go in there. And there were boxes of uniforms that were already sewn up with your name badges on them and your unit identification, right? Your unit patch and stuff. And they were handing them out, and they were the right sizes and everything. And you didn't have to pay for them. Right? I'm like, wow, these guys must really like us. It was, and then you're looking around, and there's boxes of ammo, and there's crates of grenades, and there's, mortars, and all these things were happening. it was very accelerated.
Yeah.
So, that's Dan, and everybody always laughs like it's a combat jump, right? No, it's not Normandy. I don't care. I was 22 years old. I'm a child. I don't know anything. I was doing what I was told, and really amazing experience.
Yeah, but the truth of that, Joe, is all of us from the paratrooper community, special ops community, whatever, that is, we go to jump school and we jump, we keep current so that we can do that. Yeah. And there's not very many of us who have been able to do that. And so it's not that defines a person, but that is something, it's just like we don't necessarily want to have to go to war, but we train for war so that when that time comes, we're able to execute well. Yeah. And that's just something that from the military perspective, that's you were doing your job, and that is the pinnacle for all of us, is to be able to execute our job in a combat environment. It's not that we desire combat, it's there's this satisfaction that we get for knowing our job and doing that job as it was intended.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 22 years old, you've got Italian jump wings, and now you've got a mustard stain. Like you must have been feeling pretty good about yourself.
Yeah.
Like you were probably, well, maybe you probably didn't even know. You didn't even know. But like when you look back, one of the things I enjoy doing when the SFA sends out their magazines and whatnot is basically, the obituary is there, right? And you get to read about these guys and their incredible careers and, what they did in Vietnam or through the 80s and 90s. And, like looking ahead, right, Joe, like you can look back on your career and just up to that point, like that is super rare just to have one of those things, but then the combination of them, I mean, that's part of your legacy now, right? Like, doesn't define you, but it's certainly part of that legacy.
It's crazy. Just the whole thing, September 11th happening, going to ending up at 173rd and then ending up at 160th SOAR. It's insane. It was something that I could have never imagined it, never written it out. I mean, yeah. Who would have known that would have been my career? And what's crazy is I joined a little bit later. I didn't join right after high school. I was, working at a stamping plant making parts for Ford.
Yeah.
And then decided this is horrible. Yeah. I'm in a hot environment. I'm sweaty. There's oil and grime and dirty people around. Yeah. So I joined the Army.
Yeah.
And jump into Iraq, yeah.
Fast forward a couple years, and there you are, hot, sweaty,
with nasty people all around.
People around. I mean, anybody who's been an airborne infantry medic or a medic in general on a line, how dirty people can be.
Yeah.
You're like, this is how you take a shower. This is how you brush your teeth. This is how we apply deodorant. This is why we change our socks. You know what I mean? As a medic, you're fixing a lot of problems, man. You're not just a medic. You are a counselor, a financial advisor. You teach people to read, right? I mean, I'm not kidding around at all. This is real. This actually happens, so it's funny. I taught people how to drive cars, because people from New York City join the military. They're patriotic, but none of them could afford to own a vehicle. So I ended up with 3 or 4 guys in 173rd that didn't have a driver's license, and they were 24 and 25 years old.
Yeah.
And so they learned to drive in Italy?
Yeah, so exactly.
Oh, good Lord. That is the worst place.
But listen, if you can drive in Italy, I know that they went back to New York and were fine. So
oh, yeah, undoubtedly.
I did them a solid, right?
You did.
If they were on the right side of the road, right? No, so, I mean, okay, so let's look at this, right? Like, 22 years old, combat jump wings from Italy, great experiences there. You come back, you go to 160th, right? There's, we're fast forwarding a little bit here, but, essentially you end up working with tier 1 units, right, out of 160th, right? Like phenomenal career, right? Like stuff people dream of, right?
And those guys loved him. Like the guys from CAG absolutely loved Joe. Joe was their jam.
Yeah.
So it was fun. I'll tell you one fun story. Just to fast forward, spend roughly a year in Iraq with 173rd, and we got into skirmishes. We had things happen, but it wasn't super eventful like it was later on, because in the beginning it was kind of the Wild West, right? No one really knew what was happening, and there was still this, we watched this, country like fold in on itself, but all that anger and aggression hadn't been directed directly towards us, just in small little increments. Well, long story short, I end up going through, JFK Special Warfare Training Center, going to SOCM and meet a lot of guys there, a lot of awesome, Navy SEALs, PJs, Green Berets, like it was, Marines, like everyone was there together. Like everyone, a lot of people don't know that for that training, you're all together. Swick boat guys, met amazing guys. But what was funny is just to tell you this funny story, this was in '04. So when we were graduating, they brought in some like original SF guys from World War II, right? So and this just goes back to the combat jump thing because it's funny. You'll have, a small gold star for one, one on the wings, for two, both wings and center. Four is 1, 2, 3, 4 wings. But if you had jumped 5 combat jumps in World War II, you ended up with this very large gold star in the middle. And I don't know the guy's name. He was just dressed, but he was wearing his jump wings, of course. And he was old. This guy had to be 90 then. But everyone, of course, because I had the combat jump, was like, oh, you gotta meet Joe King. You got to go talk to this guy. So me and this old guy, of course, we hit it off. It's awesome, right? Well, funny story is they had just 55-gallon buckets filled with beer, like, whiskey, anything you'd want, right? Because we're graduating. This is fun. We finally get to let loose. Like, they have had you for 8 months, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, just taking care of business, right? This isn't college. This is, you are going to graduate and you will meet the standard. So anyhow, the guy and I start talking. Well, he knows probably more about this jump into Iraq than I know. And I said, let me go grab some beers, and I can't wait to hear these stories. I'm like, I can't believe you had all 5 combat jumps. And he looks directly at me and said, I have 6.
Oh, wow.
So I look at him and say, I thought there was only 5. And this guy looks back at me with the most disgusted look you could actually give a person. I think maybe only my wife or my teenage daughter has given me the same look. And he said, I bet you there's a lot of things you've thought in your short life.
Wow.
And I was like, let me go grab some beers and I'll be back to talk to you. Apparently he had jumped into like Papua New Guinea or something that I didn't know about.
Wow.
I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah.
So graduate from there, end up at 160th. And, before September 11th, 160th was, especially for medics, in my mind, experimental. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I mean, they had not had, these high level operations really yet. They were still like, it was all part of, figuring it out as adding these medics to this tier 1 unit that could transition and help get guys off the ground and get them into the air and get them to, where they needed to be medically.
Yeah, the history is a lot different because, like in Somalia, the 160th wasn't flying medics. Right? They had medics, yeah, but they weren't flying them. And then even for the Rangers, they had the 300 F1 here, and that wasn't even they hadn't codified anything as far as the course, from what I understand, because all those guys say, oh yeah, they threw us in here, but guys like Scotty Gilpatrick, they threw them in there. And they didn't necessarily have a course. They were just like, okay, you're going to go in and then we'll pull you out. So they didn't have the same experience, but a lot of lessons learned from Somalia and the value added of having 160th medics that were SOCM medics and flying missions and everything like that. Yeah.
I arrived there. It was really intense. You're getting read on, you're learning new things about a unit that even in your own mind is cooler than you, right? Yeah. And there were some larger than life figures there. There were guys that was like, wow, I had heard of that guy. I mean, we all knew Mike DuRant, right? This is where he came from. We knew who we were going to be working with. We knew that Rangers were going to be here and tier 1 units and CAG and DevGru and some of these really cool names that at that time, you didn't ever hear about them and you didn't talk about them. You didn't think about talking about them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a laser would come out of the sky and kill you. You know what I mean? Like it was intense. So, you know, you get there, went through Green Platoon. It was, it's basically just basic training all over again to teach you some things about being in a special operations unit.
Yeah. Hold on, Joe. We got.
Yeah, I'm gonna let's do a pause real quick. I've had too much coffee.
You got to go do a potty.
I do.
I didn't know we did potty breaks on podcasts.
I guess we do now.
Yeah.